Lily had always prided herself on being a dedicated wife. For over 10 years, she had built a life with Tom, a life that was filled with the small comforts of routine. Sunday mornings spent over coffee, afternoons in the garden, and evenings wrapped in the quiet warmth of their home. There had been bumps along the way, of course. Every marriage had them, but she had never imagined that their relationship could crumble in such a way, or that it could happen so suddenly. It was late on a Thursday afternoon when everything changed. Lily had decided to leave work early that day, feeling the exhaustion of the week piling up on her shoulders. She'd been caught in a stressful project at the office, juggling deadlines and difficult clients, and the thought of coming home to Tom was a welcome relief. She had no idea that this decision would be the catalyst for the destruction of her world. The key turned in the front door, and as Lily stepped inside, she noticed something was off. There was a strange quietness that hung in the air, a silence that didn't belong in their normally bustling home. She shrugged it off, thinking maybe Tom was working late or perhaps out running errands. But then, as she walked into the living room, she froze. Sitting on the couch was Tom, dressed in his usual casual work clothes, his blue shirt, sleeves rolled up, his familiar sneakers. But next to him, sitting far too close, was a woman Lily didn't recognize. She had dark, shoulder-length hair and was dressed in a red blouse that looked far too expensive for someone Lily had never seen before. There was a familiarity between them, a closeness that instantly made Lily's stomach tighten. Tom looked up, a half-smile forming on his lips as if nothing were amiss. "Lily, you're home early," he said, his voice a bit too casual. Lily's heart raced, but she didn't know why. She couldn't understand what was happening, why this woman was sitting on their couch, so comfortably, so at ease. She stood there for a moment, frozen, her mind scrambling to make sense of the scene in front of her. "This is Jessica," Tom continued, gesturing toward the woman next to him. "She's been helping me with a few things." Lily's mind went blank. "Helping you?" she echoed, her voice sounding far too small, as if the words were being torn from her throat against her will. Tom's eyes shifted slightly, and for the first time, Lily saw a flicker of hesitation, but it was gone in a moment, replaced by an uncomfortable calmness that only made her feel more on edge. He cleared his throat, then continued, "Lily, I think we need to have an important conversation." The weight of his words sank in, and Lily felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She took a step back, trying to steady herself, but her legs felt like jelly. "What conversation?" she asked, her voice trembling now. Tom glanced at Jessica, who gave him a small, understanding smile. He turned back to Lily, his expression shifting into something more serious. "Lily, I've been seeing Jessica for the past year. We've been involved." The world seemed to slow down as Lily stood there, unable to comprehend what he was saying. Her breath caught in her chest, and she felt the blood drain from her face. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. Tom couldn't be telling her this. "Tom," Lily whispered, her voice breaking as her brain tried to make sense of his words. "What do you mean, you've been seeing her?" Tom's gaze softened. "Lily, I didn't want to hurt you. I thought I could fix things on my own, but the truth is, I haven't been happy for a while. I haven't felt happy with you in a long time. Jessica makes me feel understood, like I'm not alone, and I've decided that I want to be with her." Lily felt as though the floor had been ripped out from under her. Her mind raced, trying to hold on to something, anything to anchor herself to reality, but it was all slipping away. The life she had built, the years of shared memories, the plans for the future. Everything was crumbling before her eyes. Jessica's presence was like a shadow over Lily's entire being. She sat there, calm and composed, as though she had every right to be there. There was no sign of remorse or guilt on her face. In fact, she looked almost pleased. Lily's gaze flickered between Tom and Jessica, searching their faces for some sign that this was some cruel joke. But there was nothing. Tom's eyes were steady, and Jessica simply smiled back at her, as though this was an ordinary, everyday conversation. Tom shifted on the couch, leaning forward slightly. "I think it's best if you don't keep living here, Lily. I know this isn't easy, but Jessica will be moving in, and she'll be taking your position." Lily's stomach lurched at the coldness in his words. "Taking my position?" she echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. It felt as though 1,000 knives were stabbing into her chest. "You mean you're replacing me?" Tom nodded, his voice almost apologetic but firm. "Yes, I think it's for the best. I've already made up my mind." Lily couldn't speak. The betrayal was too much. The shock was too overwhelming. She felt like she was losing her grip on reality, as if everything around her had dissolved into some horrible nightmare. How could Tom do this to her? They had built a life together. His late-night talks about their future, their shared dreams, their promises to grow old together. How could it all be a lie? Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't cry, not now, not in front of them. She turned away quickly, trying to steady her breathing, trying to regain some semblance of control. Do you think I would just leave?" Lily finally whispered, her voice cracking. She didn't know what she was asking, only that the question seemed to hang in the air, heavy and raw. Tom didn't answer immediately. He stood up, his expression softening for just a moment before hardening again. "I don't know, Lily. I think it's time we both moved on. I've already made arrangements. You don't have to stay here if you don't want to." His words were final, as if he had already written the end of their story in his mind. Lily felt the weight of his decision pressing down on her, suffocating her. Without a word, she walked toward the door. She couldn't stay here anymore. Not with them sitting there, acting as if everything was normal. Not with her heart breaking into pieces. Tom called after her, but Lily didn't turn around. She stepped out the door, onto the porch, and into the cold evening air. The house behind her felt like a distant memory, a place she no longer recognized. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to leave. She had to get away from him, from them, from the life she thought she had known. As Lily walked down the street, her mind was a blur of emotions. Disbelief, pain, anger. She didn't know what she would do next. But she knew one thing for certain. Her life had just been torn apart, and nothing would ever be the same again. Lily hadn't expected the night to be so long, but when she finally forced herself to go back to the house, she wasn't sure what she'd find. A restless night spent walking aimlessly through unfamiliar streets, her thoughts spinning with every possible emotion, had brought her to the cold realization that she needed answers. She needed to face him. The house felt suffocating when she stepped inside, the silence pressing in on her like a thick fog. The weight of her footsteps seemed to echo down the hallway, each one heavier than the last. The sight of Tom and Jessica still sitting in the living room, in the same spot where they'd been earlier, felt like a cruel reminder of the betrayal she had walked away from hours ago. It was as if nothing had changed, as if she had been gone for a mere moment rather than a night of raw, unfiltered emotions. Tom was the first to notice her. He looked up, his face pale, his features tight with guilt, but also with an odd, resigned calmness. He didn't stand up, didn't move a muscle, almost as if he were waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Jessica, on the other hand, didn't acknowledge Lily at all. She sat back in the chair, legs crossed, arms folded loosely across her chest, her face expressionless but somehow coldly indifferent. Lily couldn't bring herself to look at her. She wasn't sure she could stomach the sight of her, sitting there as if she had every right to be. For a long moment, no one spoke. Lily felt like she was suffocating, her throat tight and raw from the tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed. She had imagined this moment, of course, over and over in her mind during the long hours of her walk, but now that she was here, she found herself at a loss for words. It was Tom who broke the silence. His voice was softer than she expected, almost pleading. "Lily, I didn't want you to have to find out this way. I never wanted to hurt you." "Hurt her?" Lily bit back a bitter laugh. Hurt didn't even begin to describe what she felt. It was as though he had stabbed her in the heart, and now he was apologizing for the pain. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, her pulse quickening, but she refused to let herself break down again. Not in front of him. "Did you think you could just hide this from me forever?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. It surprised even her. The shock, the anger, the sense of betrayal, they were all churning inside her, but she refused to let him see how deeply it affected her. She had to stay in control. "You think I wouldn't notice?" Tom shifted uncomfortably on the couch, clearly unsure of how to proceed. I thought it was something we could work through. I didn't want to make you feel like you were losing me, but you've already made up your mind, haven't you?" Lily interrupted, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "You've already decided that she's the one you want." She couldn't help but glance at Jessica as she spoke, but it was a brief, sharp glance. There was no way she could look at the woman for long without feeling the searing pain in her chest. Jessica met her gaze for a split second before turning her attention back to Tom. The dismissive look she gave Lily made her blood run cold. There was no empathy in her eyes, no regret. It was as though Lily were just an obstacle in the way, something to be ignored until it was dealt with. Lily turned back to Tom. She could feel the tears burning behind her eyes, but she swallowed them down, focusing on the anger instead. She wasn't going to let him see her weakness, not now. "You're serious, aren't you? You really are replacing me with her. That's what this is, isn't it? I've been a placeholder. All these years, all this time together, and I was just a placeholder until you found someone who understands you better?" Tom opened his mouth to respond, but Lily held up her hand, silencing him. She didn't want to hear any more of his excuses. She didn't want to hear how he had tried to make things work, or how he had thought about her feelings. The truth was clear now, and it was unbearable. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, her voice suddenly quiet, more controlled. She needed to know. She needed to know exactly how deep the lies ran. "A year," Tom admitted, his voice low and almost ashamed. "Maybe a little longer. But I didn't want to hurt you. I thought I could fix things, but I couldn't." Lily's heart sank, the weight of his confession hitting her like a physical blow. A year? For a year he had been lying to her, sneaking around, pretending everything was fine between them. How many times had he kissed her goodnight, held her hand, told her he loved her, all while knowing that someone else had taken his heart? The realization made her stomach churn, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she straightened up, forcing herself to look him in the eye. "You could have told me," she said, her voice still steady but brittle. "You could have been honest with me. Instead, you chose to deceive me." "You chose her." Tom's face fell, his shoulders sagging. "Lily, please." "No," she cut him off, her voice sharper now. "Don't you dare ask for my understanding. Don't you dare try to make this about how hard it's been for you. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." Lily could feel the tears starting to burn behind her eyes again, but she pushed them away. She wouldn't cry in front of him, not now. She had to be stronger than this. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice quiet again, but with a bite. "Is this really what you want? Is this the life you imagined for yourself?" Tom didn't answer immediately. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Jessica before looking back at Lily. He opened his mouth, but it was as if the words caught in his throat. "I'm sorry, Lily," he said finally, almost too quietly to hear. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I can't pretend anymore. I can't go back." Lily looked at him for a long moment, her heart breaking at the finality of his words. There was no going back. There was no fixing this. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, had made his choice, and it wasn't her. She turned to Jessica then, her gaze icy. "And you? How long have you been planning this? How long have you known?" Jessica's eyes narrowed slightly, but she remained silent. She didn't seem the least bit guilty. Her calmness, her detachment, only served to enrage Lily further. The woman sitting in front of her had taken everything from her, and she didn't even seem to care. There was no apology, no remorse, just an empty smile and a quiet sense of superiority. "She'll be moving in," Tom said, his voice low. "I think it's time for you to start packing." Lily stood frozen for a moment, her world spinning. It was too much to take in, too much to process. She felt her chest tightening, the suffocating reality of everything closing in on her. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something, to lash out. But instead she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and turned on her heel. "Fine," she said, her voice steady, almost detached. "I'll leave. But I want you to know something, Tom. You may have made your decision, but you haven't seen the last of me. I'm not going to let this break me. I'm stronger than that." With those words, she walked out of the room, past them both, and into the silent house that had once been a home. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The days after the confrontation felt like a blur. Lily didn't know exactly how she made it through that first week after Tom's betrayal, but somehow she did. It was as if the shock had numbed her, leaving her with just enough clarity to go through the motions of the day-to-day, while her heart quietly shattered inside her. It wasn't until the second week that things began to shift, that the fog of pain began to lift, even if only slightly. Lily had always been a person who prided herself on being in control. She was the one who planned everything, the weekly meals, the family trips, the meticulous budgeting. It wasn't that she didn't enjoy the spontaneity of life, but rather that she had always found comfort in knowing what was coming next. And now, with everything she had known and built crumbling around her, she was forced to face an uncertain future. But, as difficult as it was, Lily knew she had to fight. She could not let this define her. She wouldn't. The first thing she did was reach out to her friends. It was difficult at first. She wasn't sure how to explain what had happened, or whether they would even understand the enormity of the situation. But when she finally found the courage to pick up the phone, it was as though the floodgates opened. Her friends were supportive in ways she hadn't expected. They listened without judgment, offering comfort and practical advice. Even though she had felt so isolated in those first few days, their kindness reminded her that she wasn't alone. It was Sarah, her best friend from college, who suggested that Lily consider therapy. At first, Lily hesitated. She'd never been one to seek professional help, believing that she could work through her emotions on her own. But after a few days of feeling emotionally drained and uncertain, she decided to give it a try. She wasn't expecting miracles, but if there was even a chance it could help, she was willing to give it a shot. Her first therapy session was harder than she had anticipated. Sitting in that small, cozy room with the soft lighting and the smell of lavender in the air, she felt like a stranger to herself. The therapist, a woman named Karen, was kind but direct. She didn't ask Lily to open up right away, but gently nudged her to talk about her feelings, her fears, and the pain she had been carrying. "I don't even know where to begin," Lily had confessed, her voice small and tentative. "You don't have to have it all figured out," Karen had replied with a reassuring smile. "Just take it one step at a time. We'll start with what you feel right now." And so, Lily had begun to speak, hesitantly at first, about the anger she felt toward Tom, the betrayal, and the confusion that had overwhelmed her in those first days. She spoke about the pain of being replaced, of feeling like the life she had invested in had been erased in an instant. Karen had listened patiently, offering small words of comfort, guiding Lily to understand the depth of her grief, but also helping her recognize the strength that was already within her. "You're still here," Karen had said, after one particularly difficult session. "You've been through something painful, but you're here. You're showing up, and that's a huge step." In the weeks that followed, Lily continued to see Karen. Therapy became her safe space, a place where she could unpack the complex emotions she was experiencing without fear of judgment. There were still moments when she felt overwhelmed by the sadness, but slowly the darkness that had engulfed her began to recede. Lily started to find her footing again, and with that came the realization that she was capable of more than she had ever thought possible. It wasn't just therapy that was helping her heal. The support of her friends was invaluable. Sarah, who had always been there for her, visited her regularly, making sure Lily didn't isolate herself too much. There were weekends spent with Sarah and their other close friends, hiking through the woods or having quiet dinners where they didn't talk about Tom or Jessica. It was just what Lily needed, a reminder that there was a world beyond the pain, that she wasn't defined by the breakup, that she could still have joy in her life. At work, things were starting to pick up again, too. Lily had always been a driven professional, and even though she felt emotionally drained at times, she knew that her career was a part of her life she couldn't let go of. She had to keep moving forward, for herself, if nothing else. Her boss, Rachel, had noticed the shift in her attitude and approached her one morning after a meeting. "Lily, I don't know what's going on in your personal life, but I can tell you're working harder than ever. I just want you to know that we see you. You're doing great." The compliment was small, but it made Lily's heart swell. It reminded her that she was still the same capable person she had always been, even though everything else seemed to be falling apart. She began to take on more responsibility at work, knowing that every success, no matter how small, would help her rebuild her sense of self-worth. Slowly, Lily started to reclaim the parts of herself that had been buried beneath the weight of her marriage. She started reading again. Novels she had always enjoyed but had never found the time to revisit. She joined a yoga class to help clear her mind, and after a few weeks, the physical challenge began to give her a sense of accomplishment. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lily was starting to feel alive again. One evening, about a month after her confrontation with Tom, Lily sat down on the couch with a glass of wine, reflecting on everything that had happened. Her thoughts were no longer dominated by the anger and sorrow she had felt in the weeks prior. Instead, there was a calmness in her chest, a quiet knowing that she had been through something life-changing, but it had not defeated her. She had survived. It was then that Lily realized something significant. She had finally started to let go of Tom. It hadn't been a decision she made consciously, but she could feel the weight of the memories lifting. She wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet, but she was no longer consumed by the idea of him and Jessica. She didn't need him to acknowledge her worth or her pain. She could stand on her own, without his approval, without his love. It was a powerful realization. The pain was still there, lingering like a shadow, but it no longer ruled her life. It was as if the betrayal had cracked her open, revealing parts of herself she had long ignored. Parts that were strong, resilient, and capable of creating a future that was entirely her own. Her thoughts were interrupted by a text from Sarah asking if she wanted to grab dinner. It was the perfect distraction. As Lily typed out a quick response, agreeing to meet at their favorite Italian restaurant, she felt a small smile tug at the corner of her lips. There was still a long road ahead, and there would be moments of doubt and sadness, but she knew now that she was walking it on her own terms. When she met Sarah for dinner that evening, she felt different. She wasn't just the woman who had been left behind. She was someone who had faced a painful truth, and in doing so, had emerged stronger. The laughter, the easy conversation, the delicious food. It was all a reminder that life didn't end with heartbreak. There were still moments of joy to be found, still new memories to create. And as she sat there with Sarah, sharing a meal and enjoying her company, Lily knew that she was no longer waiting for someone else to save her. She was saving herself. By the time spring arrived, Lily had become a different person, transformed by her own resilience and the challenges she had faced over the past few months. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but somehow she had found herself again. The sharp edges of the heartbreak had softened into a dull ache, the anger replaced by an almost detached sense of clarity. There were still moments when she thought of Tom, of the betrayal, but they were fleeting. They no longer consumed her. Her life was moving forward, and for the first time in a long while, she could see a future, one that didn't involve Tom. She had filled the empty spaces in her life with new routines, new goals, and new possibilities. She'd signed up for cooking classes, something she had always wanted to try but had never made time for, and found herself enjoying the process of learning something new, of creating something with her hands. The laughter of the other participants, the simple joy of kneading dough or chopping vegetables, became her therapy in a way that nothing else could. Lily was also getting better at setting boundaries. She had spent so many years putting others first, trying to accommodate everyone's needs and feelings, but now she was learning to prioritize herself. Her interactions with her friends had deepened, becoming more honest, more vulnerable. There was a sense of reciprocity that hadn't been there before, and it filled her with a sense of connection she hadn't realized she had been missing. Sarah remained her rock, and their friendship had only grown stronger. They spent more time together, not just as two people who had shared years of history, but as two women who understood each other's journeys. One night, after another late dinner and a glass of wine, Sarah looked at Lily with an expression that spoke volumes. "You know, I'm really proud of you," Sarah said softly. "It hasn't been easy, but look at you. You've rebuilt yourself from the ground up. I don't think you even realize how much you've grown." Lily smiled, the words sinking into her heart. "I didn't realize it either, not until recently. It wasn't a choice to rebuild. It was a necessity. But now I feel like I've got a grip on things. Like I'm not just surviving anymore, but living." It was a liberating feeling. She had started to believe that the world didn't revolve around Tom anymore. She had been so immersed in their shared life that when it fell apart, she thought she might be left with nothing. But now she was starting to understand that her worth didn't come from him. It came from herself. As the weather warmed, Lily decided it was time to take another step in her journey. She made the decision to move out of the house. Tom had been living with Jessica for a while now, but Lily had been holding on to the house, not ready to let go of what had once been her home. However, she could no longer live in the space that had been tainted by the memories of their life together. It was time to make a clean break. The process of packing up wasn't as painful as she thought it would be. She had already cleared out most of her things in the previous months, but now there were final touches to be made. Boxes filled with clothes she no longer wanted to wear, photographs she wasn't ready to keep, furniture that had been chosen with him in mind. Each item was a small release, a shedding of the past, and with every box that was sealed, she felt a little lighter. On the morning of the move, she had arranged for the movers to come and take the last of her things. The house was silent, the absence of her things leaving it hollow and echoing. It felt surreal, like a chapter in a book she had finished reading but hadn't quite put down. She took a final look around, standing in the living room that had once felt so full of life and love. It was strange to think that it had all changed. How easily the life she had built with Tom had unraveled, but instead of feeling devastated, she felt a sense of pride. She had survived. She had rebuilt. And now she was stepping into a future that was hers to create. The movers left, and Lily stood in the doorway, watching them drive away. She took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh spring air, and let it out slowly, feeling the weight that had been on her shoulders for so long lift just a little bit more. That night she stayed in a small apartment she had rented for a few months, a temporary space while she figured out what was next. The apartment was simple, one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a cozy living room, but it was hers. And for the first time in a long while, it felt good to have a space that was just for her. The walls weren't filled with memories of Tom and Jessica. They were blank slates, waiting to be filled with her own new stories. Over the next few weeks, Lily began to notice something else. The more time she spent in her new space, the more she realized that she was truly free. It was as though she had been given permission to start over, not just in her living situation, but in her whole life. She wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's choices anymore. She was carrying her own hopes and dreams. A few months later, Lily received a text from Tom. It was brief and to the point. "I hope you're doing okay. I just wanted to check in." She stared at the message for a long time before responding, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She didn't know what she expected to feel, but it wasn't the overwhelming sense of anger or bitterness that she thought might rise up. Instead, it was a sense of finality. The message was a reminder of the past, but that was all it was now. It no longer had the power to wound her. She typed her reply, "I'm doing well. I'm moving forward." When she sent it, she felt lighter. The closure she had been waiting for had arrived, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a simple acknowledgement of the fact that she had moved on. She had survived the storm, and now she was standing in the calm, ready for whatever came next. The following weekend, Lily took a trip to the coast. It was something she had been planning for months, and now it was finally happening. She drove along the winding roads, the ocean stretching out before her, feeling the wind in her hair and the salt air on her skin. As she walked along the beach, she reflected on how far she had come. She had found herself again. She had rebuilt her life. And, most importantly, she had learned how to let go. That evening, as the sun began to set, Lily found a quiet spot to sit and watch the waves crash against the shore. The horizon was painted in soft oranges and pinks, and the sound of the waves was soothing, calming. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in so long. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, she realized that she was truly at peace. She didn't need Tom or anyone else to validate her. She had her own strength, and that was enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Lily smiled to herself. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She was going to be okay.